God, fill my mouth with worthwhile stuff and nudge me when I've said enough. My name is Dana Odes, and I am an alcoholic. My sobriety date is June 16th, 1976. I have a home group on Zoom, a local women's meeting at 12 and 12 at 7 o'clock. Um, I am sponsored and I sponsor others. And so I believe that qualifies me. I want to thank this group and Stephen especially for inviting me to share. Um, I confess it's a little daunting, the number of participants. I've shared my story before. I come from a long line of family storytellers, and I've done it locally, but to small groups. So bear with me as I try to frame what I came from. I believe that there's some information I need to give you so that you get the perspective of the history of times that I grew up in and the family journey and I grew up in. The history of times is my family was my father, my mother, and my brother. All three were born in my parents' small hometown in mid-Illinois, delivered in home by the country doctor. And during World War II, they moved to northern Illinois, actually Will County, where I live near Joliet, Illinois, and for economic reasons. My father was able to secure a job. My mother, who was an experienced certified teacher, found a local position, and my school-age brother went off to school and they settled in. Well, just before my brothers turned 9, they were surprised, but not unpleasantly so, to learn that they were expecting another child. And I was born in a hospital here in Will County that still exists today near where I live. Now, that changed the dynamics of the family a great deal, because now my father was the only breadwinner and my mother had a child to take care of. As the war ended and the troops came home, the metropolitan lifestyle became more complicated, especially with an infant. And so my family decided to move back down to small town, rural towns in mid-Illinois. Now, the job prospects for my father were slim to none. And so my mother went off to school full time. My brother went off to school full time. And I was in the primary care of my father from the time I was 2 until the summer before I started second grade. I share that because my formative years were spent in two very different cultures. The rural culture, and at 15, my mother and I moved what we thought was temporarily for the summer to Cook County near one of her favorite nieces, so that she could get some elective surgery that was recommended, and my cousin, her niece, could look after me while that was happening. But before she could schedule the surgery, she suffered a major stroke. And so my brother, who had already moved north, moved back in with us in the basement apartment of my cousin's house. So I was raised in a rural culture and a metropolitan culture. And they're very, very different. In the rural culture, there's almost no diversity. Everyone is like-minded, usually white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, and everyone is expected to be like one another. So differences are regarded with suspicion, and households without fathers are considered broken homes, whatever the reason may be, choice or no choice. And usually if you didn't grow up in that particular town, you grew up nearby, and they knew your family history for generations. So the boundaries were fuzzy, and everybody knew your business. There may be some land between where you live, but the boundaries didn't barely existed. Now, in the urban culture, you had a different perspective. You could choose the group that you associated with, which was good, and you were not subject to the same peer pressure. In a rural area, the children of families of prosperity, or teachers or preachers, the expectations of children were far higher standard. And being a child of a teacher, when I started school, my mother told me, now you need to behave and follow the rules, and you need to do your very best. And remember, your behavior might reflect on my job. A terrible burden for a child. While she didn't teach in the school I went to, she taught in the same school district and was familiar with my teachers and they with her. So when I went to school, I became a real rule follower, and was accused of for doing well, that my mother helped me, which certainly was not true. And in an attempt to fit in, I remember one time purposely missing the answers in hopes that I would be accepted by my peers. And it didn't work. They said, see, teacher's child can't even do it. This is too hard. So it was a no-win situation. And I just muddled along, trying to be the perfect child and avoid the consequences for myself and my mother. It did not make me very popular with my peers. They felt it was the children against the adults, and I sided up with the wrong side. So the fact of the matter was that I developed some old ideas that are referred to in how it works, attitudes and opinions that resulted in nothing. There were nil results from that, but it was out of the times. The media of the day that I grew up in was not computers, but it was the movies that I went to, black and white, of course, and early TV. Now, the black and white movies I went to of the romantic kind was that boy meets girl, the love of your life, and they rode off happily ever after into the sunset. The action films were usually cowboys and Indians, and somewhere along the line, the cavalry came in and rescued them. And the dramas on TV, also black and white, were problems that could be solved in a half an hour or an hour, depending upon what the scheduled time was. And so I had some very unrealistic ideas about life in general. The fact of the matter is that I made decisions based upon some real circumstances in my life that I don't suggest that my circumstances is what made me an alcoholic, but the circumstances in my life developed these attitudes and ideas that simply didn't work. Many of them were never really challenged until I got into recovery. One of the major ones that informed me was working the steps. I understood clearly from the doctor's opinion that I am an alcoholic, that it's a threefold disease that's physical, mental, and spiritual. And not subject to any change without divine intervention. I also found the description right before the threefold disease in the doctor's opinion of restless, irritable, and discontent, one of the first descriptions of untreated alcoholism. And I thought, oh, I can certainly identify with those feelings. And then I heard a tape that explained that they're more than just feelings, they're spiritual conditions. The conditions of restlessness is that empty spot that I always felt, that hole in the soul, some people call it, felt like there was something wrong with me, and I needed to fix it or fill it. And I explored all kinds of ways to fix it. Self-knowledge, which didn't work with alcohol either. My bookcases were filled with self-help books. Many of them were based on principles that we do practice in the program, but relying on my own resources, I could not sustain them because I was self-reliant. And the second inventory that we're told to do in the fourth step description is to list our fears. Well, my fears are in this order, were and still can be when I pick them up again. My number one fear was fear of abandonment. My second fear was fear of rejection due to other people's judgment or criticism, followed by fear of failure and fear of success, clearly a no-win situation. The question after the listing your fears says, why did we have them? Isn't it because self-reliance failed us? Now, in the description of how to do the fourth step, they suggest that you can walk back through the years and discover some real honest truths about yourself. And I've done that several times. In all inventory disciplines, I find that whether it's a spot check inventory and I look at what is disturbing me for the moment, or a 10-step regular accounting of my day, or a full-fledged or situational fourth step as described in the big book, has been very really revealing. My most recent inventory, I looked at the place that fear has in my life. I walked back all the way to my earliest childhood, and I realized that fear governed an awful lot of my choices and behaviors. That's not why I became an alcoholic, but it was the initiator of many of my character defects. My earliest fear was generated by a trip that I took with my mother when I was 4. And I was nearly kidnapped in the bus depot in Cincinnati as we moved from the train leg of the trip to the bus road of the trip. A woman who had been watching how we moved about tried to walk me out the door, the revolving doors. And being a very verbal child, when I realized it was not my mother, I kept asking, well, where is my mother? Where did she go? She said she was taking me to her. And I said, but I don't see her. Perhaps because of my verbal persistent asking, or perhaps she just changed her mind because she didn't want such a child like that. She abandoned me on the sidewalk in tears just outside the revolving door. When my mother found me, of course, she was panicked. And as all children who get separated from their children, whether by choice or happenstance, I said, where did you go? And she tried to explain the situation. But as a 4-year-old, I never fully understood it, and I think for many years I suspected that she did somehow was somehow a party to that. She moved away from me, and so my trust in human beings was seriously damaged. Now, when I was 5, my only living grandparent, my beloved grandmother, passed away after a long and wonderful life. And when I was 6, my father was diagnosed with leukemia and died of that disease. And psychologists tell us that young children experience death as abandonment. So I had a great deal of abandonment issues in my life due to my circumstances. And my responses were to try to be perfect, because God forbid I was orphaned by one parent, I could be orphaned by another. And I wanted to, my hope was to be good enough to be adopted by either family members or some wonderful foster family, because I knew about such things. My mother often worked in orphans' homes over the summer, because she needed a summer job. Well, that was the birth of my perfectionism. It was a driver, a chief activator of my self-reliance, and that still is my challenge today. It tells me the inventory directions tell me to watch for selfish, self-seeking, my fear, and dishonesty. How it works tells me that the people who don't get this program are those who cannot be fully honest with themselves. And the inventory disciplines of this program have been very revealing. They've taught me how to be the authentic person that God created me to be. I recognize today that whether the spiritual malady I have is the soul sickness of fear, that absolutely, they say, our literature says, could be compared to stealing. What it steals is my peace of mind, the hope of living peacefully within my own skin. And it is the chief activator of my character defects. And so I look at my fear on a regular basis. I look at my honesty on a regular basis through the disciplines of inventory. And I've come to appreciate my authentic self in all of my relationships. Now, the miracle of this program is that in working the steps, I don't only overcome alcoholism, but I overcome my failure to be a partner among partners, a friend among friends, a worker among workers. I believed that I had ethics and morals and good intentions in my relationships, but I truly did not know how to love the way that this program teaches me. It teaches me not only to do the next right thing, but on the next level up, it tells me to do the loving thing. And so I am blessed to have this program. Our family is blessed to have this program. Although to begin with, I was in full-fledged denial. My very first drink was the result of my selfishness. I was attracted in my new high school to music and theater. And because of my association with theater and and the knowledge that many performers started their careers with Second City. My older brother belonged to a theater, an adult theater, community theater troupe that had scheduled an outing for all of the members and one guest. Knowing that he had no particular person that he was dating in his life at that time, I begged him selfishly to take me as his guest. I was 17. I I paid no attention, rule minder that I was, that we would be breaking the law because I was not of legal age to drink. The venue was a club where they certainly had a cover charge and a 2-drink minimum. And I sincerely wore him down without regard to how his reputation might have been affected or that I was encouraging him along with myself to break the law. What happened is that here I was, a teenager in a social setting with young adults, very anxious and uncomfortable. And my brother explained to me that here is what he would order me. He would order me a Coke with rum and lime, which was called a Cuba Libre. The vendor would be happy to serve the drink. Questioning eyes looking at my drink would think I was drinking Coke. And he said, I'll order you the 2 drinks, but sip them slowly. Well, that first sip, when that rum hit, you know, I had the immediate sensation of ease and comfort in that social setting where I didn't belong, and I didn't care anymore. It just removed the anxiety. And I remember thinking, where has this been all my life? This was, from that moment on, became the answer to those kind of situations where I was filled with anxiety and outside my comfort zone. I did not abuse it regularly in the beginning. I put it in my pocket for those occasions where I was anxious in social setting. Now, I was raised in a working class community and had hopes of a college education, but didn't know how I was going to do that. And what I wound up doing was going to our local community college, junior college, one of the oldest in the state. And the first day of my first class, I met a young man who was waiting for the same music class I was going to. Turns out he was also in my French class. And for the first time, I had some real undivided attention from a boy. Well, I blossomed in that circumstance. I was certain that, I was on the road to meeting my one true love, and we would ride off into the sunset. And of course, with hormones raging, I had to write in my sexual inventory that I pushed that relationship way ahead of time. We started out with going steady with his class ring, and I pushed it further, and we spoke of commitment, and we considered ourselves engaged because we were talking marriage. And these 2 nerdy rule followers went to the college library and looked up what state nearby could we be married without parental permission. It turns out it was Michigan, and we eloped there and were married at 18 by a justice of the peace. We came back, and the agreement was that he would return to school and I would resume my education after he finished. Now, mind you, this was the era of the Vietnam War and go-go dancing of all things. And the young men all around me were being drafted for service, and many of them sent directly to Vietnam. Now, there were some exemptions at the time. The first of which was if you were in school, you were exempt. And when that disappeared, you were exempt if you were married. And of course, we had eloped. So my husband was exempt then too. And finally, when that disappeared, if you were married and had children, you could be exempt. Now, we had both agreed we were not ready to have children yet. But, and as it turns out, we had such different opinions, uh, social opinions of what marriage was like. He he adhered to the beaver cleaver kind of thing, where the man went out and slayed the dragons and brought home and enjoyed the spoils of his labors, and the woman was meant to clean and cook and keep the home fires burning. Well, my rural upbringing, I adhered more to the the image of the family horses team, where they were yoked together and shared the burden, and one may have been a lead horse in stepping out, but it was a partnership. So both of us were struggled at trying to change the other person's perspective, and what affection we started out with was absolutely destroyed by that. And so when we discussed that we were not ready to have children, my husband announced that he was going to enlist so that he could get the kind of situation he wanted. And in fact, he wanted a divorce. So now I had abandonment and rejection all at once, and resentment, huge resentment. And I said, when you finished your service, I will not object. I will not prevent the divorce, but you will pay for it. And I said, and in order to sustain myself, I will need the government allotment that they send to wives. And so he left, and my mother moved in with me because her health conditions and her financial conditions, she really could no longer afford to live on her own. I got a larger apartment. It was my home and my rules. And I was exhausted by the fact that I worked in retail all day long on my feet and went out dancing in the go-go uh, lounges all night long. And clever me, to fix my life, I decided to combine my vocation with my avocation. And I went to work in the alcohol business industry. I started out in the local kind of college bars with uh, DJs, music, and peanuts on the ground, and I was a cocktail waitress, but there wasn't much in the way of tips there. And up the street, there was a lounge that featured topless dancers and was an adult crowd that was much more likely to tip. And so I went to work at this mob supported uh, lounge and quickly caught on to the values that were there. I was so angry and disgusted, and I drank at my husband, and I was filled with resentment. I threw out all my values and said, these were taught to me, they don't work anyway. And I threw them all away and climbed both feet into the values in the bar. And because I caught on well, I was I was not considered the usual dumbbell and was actually when they opened an afternoon show because the owner's son was hospitalized, I was trusted to run that afternoon show and when and the evenings if a dancer didn't show up, I was even a part-time dancer. This was a very reckless lifestyle. My mother was very concerned about all of this, and she left the Ann Landers. Do you have a problem with drinking things around the house? And uh, because it was my home and my rules, and I paid the majority of the bills, I was not having any of it. But when they discovered a body in the forest preserve 100 feet from my bedroom window, I began to wonder if she maybe had a point. Well, my self reliance, I came up with a solution. I would change where I drank and who I drank with, and even what I drank if necessary. And I went to work in neighborhood bars where the crowd stopped after work and they supported baseball teams and social and athletic clubs. And I was the day barmaid. Basically, I cleaned up and restocked the supplies. And in the evening, I turned around and sat down and became a customer at the bar. That's where I've met my late husband. I was I was fully honest that I was not divorced, but expecting to be divorced when my husband got through with his service. And I he was known to everyone as nice guy Ron, and he really was a nice guy. So nice that the girls in the crowd all considered him kind of the brotherly person and a safe ride home. And I thought, are they crazy? They chased the bad boys or the ones that wouldn't make a commitment. And we became good drinking buddies. He never criticized my drinking or what I drank, and he was wonderfully accepting of me. And I met his parents, and they were too. Turns out, as the relationship progressed, he wound up spending more nights at my house than he did in his own home, and so eventually we just cut the crap, and he moved in with me, and um, and he said that when you get your divorce, let's get married. Well, you know, fear of failure. I said, well, no, that can't be possible. And when my husband came home and secured our paid paid for our divorce, I discovered that I was pregnant. And my husband to be said, well, then let's get married. And I said, if that's the only reason you're marrying me, don't let the door hit you on the way out. And he said, Dana, I'm the one that's been asking you right along to marry me. You're the one who was saying no. And I went, oh, it's right. And so, with great fear, I agreed to marry him because I didn't want my child to grow up fatherless like I had. And he was a wonderful father and a wonderful husband. But the truth was that we both drank almost on a daily basis. I learned to drink beer, I which I hadn't really even liked the taste of, but I was not ready to lose the effect of alcohol. On outwardly we looked like we led a very normal life. We took care of his parents and their home, and the maintenance had become too much, and so on the weekends, I would take my laundry over and do my laundry at their house, and we would cut the grass and trim the bushes and paint the garage, which was too much for my father-in-law, who was retired and had heart condition himself. This became a real burden, and so we had a group conscience with the family and decided that we would we would throw in our lots together, and my in-laws agreed to they would sell their home and use part of the proceeds to make a down payment on a two flat, which was common in our community. They were often family uh, communes with both levels being family, and that's what we did. They made the down payment, and we agreed to pay the mortgage and up and do the maintenance. We worshiped regularly at our church. We even served in many capacities. But what most people probably did not suspect, only those under our roof, is that we drank ourselves to sleep each night. And so our children were aware of the fact that we would argue sometimes at night, and that things were not well. What happened is a friend of mine, a girlfriend that used to go out drinking with me in the early days because there was safety in numbers, she kind of disappeared from my life, and she called all of a sudden from a shelter. She and her two children were in a shelter in Chicago. And in my self-righteous way, thinking that I had fixed my own life, I said to her, well, I don't know how to help you, but I may know someone who does. And I called my pastor. My pastor called someone in AA, and that person came to our house and 12 stepped my friend in our kitchen with our beer cans carefully stacked for recycling. And I didn't see the irony of that. But what I did get to see is I saw the miracle of this program begin to work in my friend's life. Her circumstances outwardly didn't seem to be much better. She wound up having to put her children in foster care. But what I saw is that she got peace and serenity. She got that ease and comfort right in her own skin and in her own ups and downs in life. All the things that my changes were supposed to have provided. So she was a guest in our home on our son's 8th birthday. And I did what one alcoholic should never do. I asked another alcoholic, well, what do you think of my drinking? Do you think I could be an alcoholic? And she explained that alcoholism is a disease that can only be diagnosed and defined and declared by the person themselves. But she went on to say in the language of the heart, but as long as I've known you, I've never known you to be a normal drinker. And you know, when the truth like that is spoken at just the right time and just the right uh, attitude, I was sick and tired of being sick and tired, and I heard the truth for the first time. And I sincerely prayed to the God of my understanding at that time that he would relieve my drinking, and I might as well have said, and I'll handle all the rest. And I put my life on pause, waiting for my husband, my drinking partner, to conclude that he too was an alcoholic. And so I discovered what we call dry drunk. I didn't even make my first meeting for 3 years, waiting for him to declare he was an alcoholic. I, of course, had heard of Al-Anon, but that was for friends and family members of alcoholics. And since he didn't declare himself an alcoholic, I didn't feel I qualified for that. When I finally started visiting AA after 3 years, I brought the book that my friend had given me, the big book that my friend had given me, to, of all things, my higher power led me to a big book discussion. We read the big book, and lo and behold, I found the description of who I was in the pages of the big book. And I heard the kind of rigorous honesty that I never heard in my life. These people were sharing things that I would swore I would never say aloud in public. And I was stunned by all of this and attracted by this, but not ready to surrender to that because I wanted my husband to come with me. And so I treated it like my church. I went to the big book meeting once a week. I experienced the attraction of what was there, but I did not put both feet in the middle of the program. And in fact, waited for prayerfully for 9 years for my husband to admit that he was an alcoholic and sign up for an outpatient treatment. When we went to as family members to the outpatient treatment, they advised that all the family members should expose themselves to the principles of recovery and suggested that I should go to Al Anon and our children should go to Alateen. They were still at home. And I did that. There was instinctively, I knew that I could not mind my own business if and not try to direct his recovery, even though I had very little of my own. And so I did go, I do work both fellowships, the coin, both sides of the coin of alcoholism to this very day. What happened is that we had become so isolated as a family that we did not know how to even play together. And so our children who were 10 and 16 accompanied us to open speaker meetings on Saturday night and stayed for bingo afterwards. And on Sunday mornings, we went to open speaker meetings, and had breakfast with this cluster of friends that came in around the same time that we did in working the program. And a fellowship I crave began to happen. And sure enough, by working these steps again and again, and becoming what God had always intended me to be, our family was healed. Now the children, once they were grown and we were empty nesters, no longer engaged in a 12-step recovery program, felt that they knew enough about the principles that they could manage their own lives. And in in order to maintain a family relationship, I had to accept that I could not manage their lives any more than I could manage my own, and that their choices were their choices, and my option was to love them right where they were and accept them right where they were. And unlike many of my friends in recovery, we were blessed not to be estranged from our children. That's not to say that there weren't still deep scars from having lived in an alcoholic household. When when my when my situation became overwhelming, one after the other of in our two flat, where my mother died, my in-laws one by one died, and my grown daughter at, graduating from with a bachelor's degree moved in downstairs. The circumstances of the steps, because we were living on the second floor, we were the young people when we moved in. We talked about it and decided that we needed to find a retirement home that was on one level. That's when we moved 20 years ago back to Will County in a ranch home. And shortly after we moved in, my husband had a major stroke. And in my self-righteous way, I spoke to the God of my concept, and knowing the statistics that often within a short time after a major stroke, that the victim would suffer another stroke or a massive heart attack. And I said, God, with your help, I think that I can live up to my marriage vows in sickness and in health, and proceeded to live with integrity as valuing those vows. And it turns out that God's will was for my husband to live 13 years. Now, he lost the power to speak, and he worked very hard to walk short distances on a quad cane. He worked so hard that he was able to walk our daughter down the aisle when she married, and I took him as to one meeting a week where it was accessible for him to get in. And he nodded in agreement when people quoted his favorite sections of. He rolled his eyes at my absurd uh, sharing, and we had been together so long that we still had communication, despite the fact that he could not do his own sentences. Now, when he was agitated, we would hear his voice in phrases like, "Let's go." He was tired and wanted to rest, because that part of that comes from a different part of the brain. And so we grew still in our recovery together, with his one meeting a week, and my children stepped up when I needed to go to a meeting, and my higher power took care of him when they were not available. Now, some years ago, almost a decade now, he passed away. And I spoke with my higher power and said, I ask your help in how to take as good a care of myself as I did of him. During those 13 years that I took care of him, some of the hardships I suffered was that I had 3 colon resections, 2 of which were malignant, and the third was a polyp that came back negative, but could not be removed by a colonoscopy. Because of the colon cancer, I was referred to an oncologist who was not happy with my blood work, and ordered further testing, and announced that I did in fact have a form of leukemia, one of my big fears after my father's death. And he explained that while they had found cures for many of the leukemias, the one I had was not curable, but it was treatable. But it was linked with rheumatoid arthritis. So now I had 2 conditions that compromised my immunity. And my higher power has such a sense of humor that the treatment for both of those conditions was the same medication. He understood that I loved a 2-for-1 special. And I have been treating both conditions with that medication for decades now. I in a few years back had after my husband passed away, had a car accident where I totaled my car, and I was in nursing home rehab for 4 months, home on health care, physical therapy and occupational therapy. And I never fully recovered the full range of motion in my right ankle, and I still have a trigger finger in my left hand, and my I lost the car to and the privilege to drive, which probably was a good thing. It saves me the expense of gas and maintenance and insurance. And I'm lucky enough to live in an area that provides transit for for handicapped or seniors. But I have to get down my driveway. They cannot pull into the driveway. And so I had to learn how to securely walk down the ramp that had been installed in our garage and then use a walker or a quad, on strong days, a quad cane. This past uh, Good Friday, I fell in my home and congratulated myself that I fell smart. I did not hit my head because I'm on a blood thinner, which could have had tragic results. I did not lock my arms, so I only sprained my ligaments in my left arm, and I obviously sprained my foot, and so I iced and heated the areas of my wounds and continued to walk on my my feet. And my daughter took me to my appointment for the treatment of my diabetic retinopathy, and I was in such pain that she took me around the corner and to the uh, immediate care, and they x-rayed my foot only to discover that I had broken my foot. They referred me to an orthopedic surgeon, and once again, I wound up with home health and physical therapy for balance and core development. And truly, I have been able to overcome my difficulties as an example of God's will and care. I'm I'm happy to say that thanks to the 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 COVID and my compromised immunity and having to do everything virtually, I've uh, I've I've attend all things virtually now, including my church services, and I'm so grateful that I mastered the technology for Zoom. I regularly attend this meeting and love the chatter beforehand and the fellowship afterwards, and was very privileged to be invited to share my message. You know, in most of my meetings, we read the promises, the 9-step promises, and they truly are the antidote for the other descriptions of untreated alcoholism. But my favorite promise of all is the 10th step promise. In the 10th step promise, I'm assured that I uh, I can I can stop fighting anything and anyone, including alcohol, and I receive uh, almost without effort very balanced attitude where I'm not even tempted. And that is all a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of my fit spiritual condition. And for me, that amounts to the simple ABCs of how it works. A, I am powerless over alcohol and any other spiritual condition, malady I may have. B, that no human power could have relieved any of those, certainly not my own. And C, that when I do seek God, He can and will heal me from all my obsessions. So I'm very grateful to be here and share tonight, and I hope that um, someone heard and got something from what I shared. I know that every time I share, God grows me. So thank you for the opportunity.